So, I guess it all started when Mila and I were driving up to my dad's place. It was a long drive, and honestly, I had way too much time to think. Maybe that's what got me in trouble. You ever get that feeling when you're stuck in a car for hours, and your mind just drifts to places you really don't want it to go? That was me. And where did my brain land? Right on my marriage. Yeah, me and Mila, we got married young, stupid young. I was 23, she was 22. Barely knew what the hell we were doing. Anyway, we were on our way to see my dad, George, who was 45 and getting married again. This was his second time around. Mom had passed years ago. Cancer took her after years of fighting it. And now he was marrying Diana, who, fun fact, is older than him by 4 years. She's 49. I didn't get it. I mean, after everything with Mom, you'd think he'd just want to live out the rest of his life in peace, right? But no, there he was, diving headfirst into another marriage, like he hadn't learned anything from the first. And don't get me started on Diana. She has a daughter, Sandra. She's 27, married to this guy, Dave. No one really knows his age, and honestly, who cares? The guy's a mystery, and not in a good way. As we're driving, I'm sitting there, staring out the window, and all these thoughts about Mila start popping up in my head. We've been married, what, a little over a year? And already, things just felt off. We argued a lot. About dumb shit, too. Like, I'd leave a dish in the sink, and she'd blow up, or she'd nitpick something I said, and next thing I knew, we were in this stupid shouting match. I'm not gonna lie, part of me thought we rushed into it. But then again, maybe that's what people do when they're young and think they've got the whole world figured out. I turned to her at one point, right there in the car, and I said, "Do you think we got married too fast?" She just gave me that look. You know, the one where they don't want to answer because they know they'll either piss you off or open a can of worms. Yeah, that one. But instead of dodging it, she goes, "Justin, we're fine. Marriage isn't easy, but we're in it together, right?" Sure, okay, I thought, but it didn't feel fine. Maybe it was me overthinking, or maybe it was her acting all distant lately that had me questioning everything. I mean, she wasn't the same Mila I'd fallen in love with. We finally pulled up to my dad's place. Nice house. Too nice, really. It was one of those homes you knew had way too much going on behind closed doors. My dad came out to greet us, all smiles, like he was trying to convince himself this wedding was the best thing that ever happened to him. Diana wasn't far behind, putting on the same fake smile. But the real kicker? Sandra. She barely said 2 words to me or Mila. She was distant, cold, like she couldn't give 2 shits about this new family dynamic. And to be honest, I couldn't blame her. I felt the same way. Who the hell are we kidding, trying to act like this is some happy Brady Bunch setup? Dinner that night was awkward. Like, painfully awkward. It was all small talk, and no one really addressed the elephant in the room. My dad marrying some woman we barely knew, and everyone pretending it was all rainbows and butterflies. Sandra sat there, quiet as a mouse, while Dave, her husband, kept checking his phone like he had somewhere better to be. Mila, on the other hand, tried to act normal, but I could see through her. She was putting on a show, trying to seem like the supportive wife. But the truth? We were falling apart, and I was too scared to admit it. That night, after dinner, we went back to our room. Yeah, we were staying over, which, looking back, was probably the dumbest idea ever. I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the past few months over and over again. The fights, the cold shoulders, the way Mila would be glued to her phone at random times. I didn't want to be that guy, but part of me wondered if there was something going on that I didn't know about. But I shook it off. Paranoia, right? I was probably just projecting my own doubts about us onto her. But man, I couldn't shake that gut feeling that something was off. At one point, I leaned over and asked her again, "Are we really okay?" She didn't answer right away, just stared at the ceiling for what felt like forever. Then, she turned over, facing away from me, and said, "We're fine, Justin. Go to sleep." Yeah, right. Fine. The next morning, things felt just as weird as they did the night before. I don't know if it was the awkwardness between us all, or maybe I was just too stuck in my head. Either way, I needed to clear my mind, so I figured I'd go outside and get some air. That's when I ran into Sandra. She was already out on the porch, sitting there with her coffee, looking just as disconnected as I felt. We started talking, and it didn't take long for the conversation to turn to our parents' whirlwind marriage. It felt like they had barely known each other before deciding to tie the knot, and neither of us was really okay with it. It's too fast, I said, shaking my head. I mean, I'm happy Dad's happy, but it feels rushed, like they didn't think it through. Sandra nodded. Exactly. My mom never even talked about dating after my dad died, and then suddenly, boom, she's married again. She paused, staring into her cup. It just doesn't feel right. I agreed, and as we sat there, I found myself opening up to her. Maybe it was because I knew she was going through the same kind of confusion I was. Or maybe I just needed someone to talk to, someone who wasn't Mila. I told her about the doubts I'd been having about my marriage, how Mila and I had gotten married too young, too fast, and how things between us weren't what they used to be. I get that, Sandra said quietly. Dave and I don't know what's happening anymore. He's been acting so strange lately, distant. I don't even feel like I know him anymore. There was something in her voice that caught my attention. It wasn't just sadness, it was suspicion. I didn't push her for details, but she must have sensed that I was on the same page because she started telling me more about Dave. She mentioned how he'd been staying late at work, coming home smelling like perfume that wasn't hers, and how he'd gotten secretive about his phone. Classic signs, right? She didn't need to say it outright. I could tell she suspected he was cheating, and as much as I hated to admit it, I started to wonder if maybe I should be paying more attention to Mila's behavior too. The day dragged on, and I couldn't shake that conversation from my head. It was like Sandra had unlocked something inside me, a little voice that had been whispering doubts about Mila for a while now, but I'd been too afraid to listen. And then it happened. I was outside, walking around the backyard, trying to clear my head. I wasn't really paying attention to where I was going, just lost in my thoughts. That's when I saw them, Mila and Dave, together. At first, I didn't know what I was looking at. My brain couldn't process it. But there they were, standing way too close for comfort. And before I could even react, they kissed. And not just some casual peck on the cheek. No, this was something else. Something intimate. Something I'd never seen from Mila before. My heart sank. It was like someone had punched me in the gut, and I couldn't breathe. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. My feet felt glued to the ground, and I just stood there watching like an idiot. I don't know how long I stood there. It felt like forever, but it was probably only a few seconds. I felt this intense mix of emotions. Confusion, anger, betrayal. I wanted to storm over and confront them, demand answers, but something stopped me. Maybe it was shock, or maybe I just wasn't ready to face the truth. Either way, I stayed hidden, watching them for just a little longer before I quietly slipped away. My mind was racing. How the hell was this happening? What was Mila doing with Dave? I kept trying to make sense of it, but nothing was adding up. The woman I married, the one I thought I knew, was out there making out with some guy who was married to Sandra, no less. It was like my entire world was crumbling in front of me, and I had no idea what to do next. I made my way back to the house, feeling like I was on autopilot. My hands were shaking, and I was doing everything I could to keep it together. The last thing I wanted was for anyone to notice that something was wrong. I wasn't ready for that conversation, not yet. So I plastered on a fake smile and went back inside, trying to act like everything was normal when inside I was losing my shit. I knew I had to talk to someone, but who? I couldn't go to my dad. He was too wrapped up in his own shit with Diana. Mila was obviously out of the question, and there was no way in hell I was talking to Dave. That left Sandra. She was the only one who might understand, the only one who could help me make sense of what I'd just seen. Later that day, I found Sandra alone again, this time sitting on the steps of the front porch, staring off into the distance. I sat down next to her, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure how to start, but I couldn't hold it in any longer. I saw something today, I said quietly, keeping my voice low. Something I wish I hadn't seen. Sandra turned to look at me, her eyes filled with curiosity and concern. What do you mean? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I saw Mila and Dave together. They were kissing. Her face went pale. For a moment, she didn't say anything, just stared at me in disbelief. Then finally she spoke. I knew it. I fucking knew it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I had a feeling something was going on, but I didn't want to believe it. I nodded, feeling the same way. Neither of us wanted this to be real, but there it was, staring us in the face. We sat there in silence for a while, both of us processing what we'd just uncovered. Our worlds were falling apart. and neither of us knew what to do next. But one thing was clear. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Dinner that evening was supposed to be normal, or at least as normal as things could get when you've just watched your wife making out with another man. I knew I had to talk to Sandra about it. I couldn't keep this inside any longer, and she was the only one who would understand. She had to know. But there was this weight in my chest, like if I said it out loud, it would make everything real. There'd be no going back after that. Everyone was busy preparing for dinner, so I took the opportunity. I found Sandra in the kitchen, moving dishes around, but her mind seemed elsewhere. I walked in, stood there for a second, and then without wasting any time, I just said it. I saw them. I blurted out. Sandra froze, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. She didn't even turn around at first. I could feel the tension in the air, thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, slowly, she turned to face me, her eyes wide for a moment before that look of bitter understanding washed over her. "What do you mean?" she asked, but I knew she already knew the answer. "Mila and Dave. I saw them in the backyard. Together. They were kissing," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper, like saying it any louder would make it worse somehow. For a moment, Sandra didn't say anything. She just stood there, absorbing the blow. And then, after what felt like an eternity, she let out this quiet, bitter laugh. It wasn't a laugh of humor, but more like someone who had finally had their suspicions confirmed, and it hurt like hell. "I knew it," she said, her voice sharp and low. "I fucking knew it." I stayed quiet, unsure of what to say next. What could I say? We were both stuck in this messed up situation, and there was no easy way out. Sandra walked to the sink, staring out the window as if trying to find some kind of answer in the darkness outside. "I had a feeling something was going on," she continued. "Dave's been acting strange for months. He's always coming home late, always on his phone, making excuses. I didn't have any proof. Until now." She paused and looked at me. "Thank you for telling me. I guess part of me didn't want to know, but it's better than feeling like I'm losing my mind." The two of us stood there, leaning against the kitchen counter, sharing this unspoken bond of betrayal. It was twisted, but it was something, and for the first time, I felt like I wasn't completely alone in this mess. We started talking, really talking. She told me about her marriage to Dave, how it had always felt off, even before the wedding. She said she never really loved him, not in the way you're supposed to love someone you're going to spend your life with. It was more like they fell into it, because it seemed like the right thing to do at the time. But now she felt nothing but anger and disappointment. "I've been angry for so long," she admitted. At him, at myself for staying. I knew something was wrong, but I just kept hoping things would get better. But now, after all this, I don't know anymore. I nodded. "Yeah, I know the feeling. Mila and I, it's been the same. The fights, the distance. I keep thinking maybe we rush into things. Maybe we weren't ready for this." There was a strange comfort in knowing someone else was going through the same kind of hell. It felt like we were both drowning, but at least we weren't drowning alone. I wasn't sure how much time passed as we stood there, spilling our frustrations, our regrets, and our anger. The kitchen felt like a world away from the rest of the house, like we were trapped in our own little bubble of misery and betrayal. Then something shifted. It was subtle at first, like an electric charge in the air between us. Sandra turned toward me, her eyes hard but searching. And then, out of nowhere, she said it. "If they can do it, why can't we?" The words hung there, thick and heavy. At first, I didn't know what she meant. Or maybe I did, but my brain refused to accept it. Then she took a step closer to me, her voice soft but sharp. "Justin, why should they get to hurt us and we just sit here and take it? If Mila and Dave can betray us like this, why shouldn't we get something out of it too?" I was floored. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I didn't know how to respond. This wasn't what I expected at all. But as crazy as it sounded, I understood where she was coming from. The temptation was there, gnawing at me. I felt this pull, this desperate need to escape the pain, to feel something other than betrayal and anger. "We're both hurting," she continued, her voice almost pleading. "And this could be our way out, or at least our way of getting back at them. If they can cheat, why can't we?" I should have said no. I should have walked away. But I didn't. Maybe it was the anger. Maybe it was the shock. Or maybe, deep down, I wanted to hurt Mila the way she had hurt me. Whatever it was, I found myself giving in to that pull. Before I knew it, we were kissing. Hard. It wasn't like with Mila. This kiss was desperate, raw, full of the pain we were both trying to bury. Our hands were all over each other. And before long, things escalated. We started tearing at each other's clothes, driven by this twisted need for revenge and escape. In that moment, it wasn't about love or even attraction. It was about release. As things heated up, I realized what was happening. Sandra and I weren't just trying to get back at our spouses. We were trying to find some kind of control over a situation that had ripped our lives apart. This was our way of taking something back, of feeling like we had a choice in all of this, even if it was the wrong one. We moved into the guest room, barely managing to close the door behind us. We were both caught up in the moment, driven by emotions we couldn't control. But just as things were about to go further, the door burst open. Standing there, eyes wide with shock and fury, was Mila. The door slammed open so hard, I thought it might come off the hinges. And there she was, Mila. The look on her face was a mix of shock, fury, and something else. Betrayal, maybe. Her eyes darted from me to Sandra and back again, like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "Are you fucking kidding me, Justin?" she screamed, her voice shaking with rage. She stormed into the room, fists clenched at her sides. "You're cheating on me? With her?" I barely had time to react before she was right in front of me, eyes wild. For a second, I didn't even know how to respond. The absurdity of the situation hit me like a punch to the gut. Here she was accusing me of cheating when just hours ago, I'd seen her all over Dave in the backyard. "You're calling me a cheater?" I snapped back, my own anger bubbling to the surface. "I saw you, Mila. I saw you with Dave. You want to talk about cheating? Let's fucking talk about it." Her face went pale for a second, and she blinked, clearly not expecting me to throw that in her face. But then she recovered, straightening her posture and narrowing her eyes. "I wasn't cheating. Bullshit." I cut her off, stepping closer. "You think I didn't see you two in the backyard? Don't stand there and try to make me the bad guy, Mila. I saw it. I fucking saw everything." For a second, I thought maybe she'd deny it, try to gaslight me into thinking I hadn't seen what I knew I'd seen. But instead, she just crossed her arms, looking more pissed than remorseful. "You don't get it," she spat, her voice shaking with frustration. "You're always so wrapped up in your own world. You don't pay attention to me. I've been lonely, Justin, for months. I try to talk to you, but you're too busy, too distracted. What was I supposed to do? Just sit there and feel unloved while you ignore me?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was trying to flip this on me, to make it sound like it was my fault that she was screwing around with someone else. I felt my blood boiling. "You're kidding, right?" I said, my voice rising. "You think being lonely justifies kissing another man? How about instead of sneaking around with Dave, you could have actually talked to me like a fucking adult?" "I tried to talk to you," she shot back, her face flushed with anger. "But you didn't listen. You never listened. You were so caught up in your own shit. You didn't even notice how unhappy I was." "Unhappy?" I yelled. "Maybe if you weren't sneaking around behind my back, things could have been different. But no, you had to fuck everything up. You had to betray me." The tension between us was suffocating, and for a moment, it felt like we were the only two people in the world. I was shaking with rage, and I could see Mila wasn't backing down either. But before I could say anything else, Sandra, who'd been quietly watching the argument unfold, suddenly jumped in. "Oh, don't even try to justify it, Mila," Sandra hissed, stepping forward. "You think your excuses make what you did okay? Guess what? Dave's been lying to me too. And you think you're the only one who's been feeling lonely." I didn't expect Sandra to come to my defense, but I could see the anger in her eyes, the same fury I felt. She wasn't just pissed at Mila. She was pissed at the whole situation. At Dave. At everything. Just as I was about to respond, we heard footsteps behind us. Of course, Dave had walked in, his face immediately dropping when he saw the mess he'd been dragged into. "What the hell is going on?" Dave asked, his voice shaky as he looked from Mila to Sandra, then to me. Sandra turned on him like a hawk. "What's going on? How about the fact that I know you've been screwing around behind my back with her?" she shouted, jabbing a finger toward Mila. Dave's face went white. Sandra. No, Dave. Sandra cut him off, her voice ice cold. I don't want to hear your bullshit excuses. Justin told me what he saw. You and Mila sneaking around like we wouldn't find out. You're both fucking pathetic. The room exploded. Sandra and Dave were going at each other, their voices overlapping as they hurled accusations back and forth. Dave was trying to deny everything, but Sandra wasn't having it. She knew. I knew. Everyone knew. The lies were out in the open now, and there was no going back. You don't get it, Sandra, Dave yelled, his face flushed with anger. Our marriage hasn't been working for a long time. This isn't all on me. Oh, save it, Sandra shot back, her voice filled with venom. You were the one who gave up, Dave. You stopped caring a long time ago. As their fight escalated, I turned back to Mila, who was watching them with a mixture of anger and something else. Regret, maybe? But I didn't care. I was done. I couldn't stand to look at her anymore. I'm done, Mila, I said quietly, my voice thick with emotion. I can't do this anymore. I don't trust you, and I don't want to be with someone who can lie to my face like you did. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she just looked at me, her expression hardening again. So what? You're just going to throw away everything we built together? Just like that? I shook my head. You threw it away the second you decided to screw around with Dave. Before she could respond, there was more commotion at the door. My dad, George, and Diana had arrived, clearly having heard the shouting. They walked in, eyes wide with confusion and shock. What the hell is going on here? George asked, looking from me to Mila, then to Sandra and Dave, who were still yelling at each other. I could see the realization hit my dad like a freight train. He put the pieces together pretty fast, his face falling as he took in the scene. Diana, meanwhile, just looked horrified. Everyone needs to calm down, George said, stepping into the middle of the chaos. This is getting out of hand, but it was too late for that. The damage was done. Mila and I were broken. Sandra and Dave were done. Even George and Diana were shaken by what they'd walked in on, and I could see the cracks in their own relationship forming right in front of me. The shouting continued for what felt like hours, accusations flying back and forth, voices rising and falling like a storm. But through it all, one thing was crystal clear. Nothing was ever going to be the same again. After what felt like a lifetime of shouting, accusing, and venting all the built-up frustrations, we all hit that breaking point where nothing more needed to be said. It was like the dust settled, but what was left in the aftermath was just wreckage, broken trust, broken relationships, broken people. We didn't speak for a while after the chaos died down. It was like we had all run out of energy, like we'd squeezed out the last drops of anger we had in us. I stood there, staring at Mila, feeling nothing but emptiness where love used to be. Maybe that was the hardest part. Not the betrayal, not the lies, but realizing that what we had wasn't real anymore. It hadn't been for a long time, and now there was nothing left to save. I looked at her, and for the first time since all this started, I didn't feel the need to argue, to justify anything. I just felt done. We need to end this, Mila, I said, my voice quiet but firm. She didn't argue. She didn't even react. She just stood there, staring at the floor, like she knew this was coming but had hoped against hope it wouldn't. We should have waited. We should have lived our lives first before rushing into something we weren't ready for. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, and there was no anger in them anymore, just a resigned sort of sadness. I know, she whispered. I've known for a while. I just didn't want to admit it. I nodded. There wasn't anything more to say. We'd both been living in denial, thinking we could make something work that was broken from the start. And now there was no point in trying to fix it. Not after everything. I'm going to file for divorce, I said, the words tasting bitter on my tongue, but feeling right too. It's over, Mila. She didn't argue. She just nodded, her shoulders slumping like the weight of it all had finally crushed her. Okay, she said softly. I'll go stay with my sister for a while. I'll pack my things tonight. It was strange watching her walk away like that, knowing it was for the last time. Part of me felt relief. The other part just felt numb. Sandra was standing nearby, watching our interaction, and when she saw Mila leave the room, she let out a long, shaky breath. I could tell she was going through the same motions. We'd both been dragged through the same hell, and now we were just trying to figure out how to crawl out of it. I can't do this with Dave anymore, she said, almost to herself, but I heard the determination in her voice. I should have left him a long time ago. This affair? It's just a symptom. Our marriage was doomed way before this. I looked at her, and I could see the pain in her eyes, but also the acceptance. Like me, she had finally come to terms with the reality that this wasn't just about the infidelity. It was about everything that led up to it. The lies, the distance, the lack of love. They had built something on shaky ground, and it had finally come crashing down. I get it, I said quietly. It's not just one thing. It's everything. And when it's gone, it's gone. She nodded, biting her lip. Yeah, I think I've known for a long time that we were never really happy. I stayed because it was easier than facing the truth. But after this, I can't pretend anymore. I don't love him. I don't even know if I ever really did. Hearing her say it out loud felt like an echo of my own thoughts. We'd all been living in this weird, comfortable denial, pretending things could be fixed, that maybe we could find happiness if we just tried hard enough. But sometimes, there's nothing left to save. Sometimes, the best thing you can do is walk away. I'm going to leave him, Sandra said, her voice firm now. I don't know what's next, but I know I can't stay in this mess anymore. Just then, George and Diana walked into the room, their faces tight with concern. They'd heard the fights, they'd seen the fallout, and now they were standing in the wreckage of their kids' lives, probably wondering if they'd made a mistake too. What's going on? George asked, his voice heavy with worry. I didn't even know how to answer that. How do you explain the collapse of everything to someone who's watching it happen in real time? But George was smart. He pieced it together fast. It's all falling apart, I muttered, running a hand through my hair. Mila and I are done. Sandra is leaving Dave. And honestly, I don't even know where to begin with all this. George's face fell, and Diana looked like she was holding back tears. I guess they'd thought this new marriage of theirs would bring everyone together, but it had done the exact opposite. Instead of blending families, it had torn everything to shreds. And then, like a ripple effect, George turned to Diana. Are we doing the right thing? He asked quietly. Maybe this was a mistake. Diana's lip trembled, but she held it together, shaking her head. I don't know, George. I really don't. I thought we were happy, but now, seeing all this, maybe we rushed into it too. Maybe we weren't thinking clearly. It was hard to watch. My dad and Diana had seemed so sure about their new life together, but now they were questioning everything. Seeing their kids' lives crumble made them look at their own relationship with fresh eyes. The doubt was there now, and it was spreading like wildfire. I love you, George said softly, taking Diana's hand. But maybe we need to take a step back. I don't want to end up like them. Diana nodded, her eyes filling with tears. Maybe you're right. Maybe we need to figure out what we really want apart from all of this. I could see it clear as day they were breaking too. It wasn't a loud, dramatic breakup like the rest of us. It was quiet, painful in its own way. But I knew then that my dad and Diana wouldn't last either. By the end of that night, everything had changed. Mila was gone. Sandra packed her bags too, ready to leave Dave behind. And George and Diana? They didn't say it out loud, but I knew they were on the verge of separating as well. The whole weekend had been a disaster, a slow-motion train wreck where everyone's lives came crashing down at the same time. But weirdly enough, there was also a sense of relief. No more pretending. No more lies. Just the cold, hard truth. As I stood in the empty guest room later that night, I realized that this was it. The end of everything I'd known for the past few years. And as scary as it was, I also felt a strange kind of peace. Because sometimes, endings are the only way to start over. A few months had passed since that night. The night where everything went to hell, and honestly, it feels like a lifetime ago. It's funny how time moves differently when you're picking up the pieces of your life. When the dust settled, Mila was gone, and so was everything that came with her. The marriage, the plans, the future we thought we had, all of it was just done. I found a place not long after she left. A small apartment, nothing fancy, but it was mine. At first, the silence in that apartment was unbearable. I remember those first few nights, lying awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how the hell I ended up here. The quiet was suffocating, like an echo of everything I'd lost. I kept thinking about Mila, about what we'd been through, the fights, the distance, the affair. I used to go over every moment in my head, wondering what I could have done differently. But as time went on, something shifted. I started to feel okay. The loneliness that had scared the hell out of me at first started to feel like freedom. I wasn't tied down anymore, wasn't constantly worrying about someone else's needs or their opinions. It was just me now, and that started to feel kind of good. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking on eggshells, wondering when the next argument would blow up in my face. I was in control of my own life. Mila moved to another city a few weeks after the divorce was finalized. I didn't ask where, didn't really care. It was over. There was no more us, and I'd made peace with that. In fact, her leaving felt like confirmation that we'd made the right decision. There was no going back, no lingering doubts. The distance between us wasn't just physical. It was the closure I needed. I started focusing on myself for the first time in years. I signed up for guitar lessons. I'd always wanted to learn but never got around to it. Something about those quiet evenings, sitting on my balcony, strumming the strings, just felt right. It was peaceful, therapeutic almost. I wasn't great at it, not yet anyway, but it gave me something to look forward to, something that was mine. I also picked up running. I signed up for a marathon. At first, I could barely get through a few miles without feeling like I was going to die, but it got easier. Each run felt like I was shedding a layer of the old me. The guy who was stuck in a toxic relationship. The guy who was afraid to be alone. With each mile, I felt stronger, not just physically, but mentally too. Running became a kind of metaphor for where I was in life. One step at a time, moving forward, leaving the past behind. One day, out of the blue, I got a message from Sandra. She'd finally left Dave. I wasn't surprised. After what happened, there was no way their marriage was going to survive. She suggested we meet up for coffee and catch up, and I agreed. It had been a while since that night, and I was curious to see how she was doing. When we met, it was different. We'd both changed, both gone through our own versions of hell, but somehow come out stronger on the other side. We talked about everything, the fight, the divorces, the mess our lives had become. But there was no bitterness anymore, just acceptance. I don't regret any of it, Sandra said, staring down into her coffee cup. I mean, yeah, it was awful, but I needed it. I needed to see how far off track I'd gotten. Leaving Dave was the best thing I've ever done. I'm going back to school now. I feel like I'm starting over, and it feels good. I nodded. I knew exactly what she meant. Same here, I said. As bad as it was, I think it was necessary. I'm better off now. I'm finally focusing on myself for once. We both smiled at that. There was a time when I thought maybe there could be something between us. Something more than just two people who had been cheated on by their spouses. But as we sat there, talking like old friends, I realized that whatever bond we had, it wasn't romantic. It was more like shared survival. Two people who had been through the same storm and come out the other side still standing. We stayed in touch after that, but it was never anything more than friendship. And that was fine with me. I didn't need anything else. I didn't need anyone else. For the first time in my life, I was okay being on my own. George and Diana, on the other hand, didn't make it. They ended up getting a divorce not long after I did. I think watching their kids' relationships implode forced them to take a hard look at their own marriage, and they realized they weren't happy either. I still talk to my dad, but it's different now. We're both kind of licking our wounds, figuring out how to move forward. He's living on his own now too, and I think he's okay with it. At least I hope he is. There's this weird sense of closure now, like the chapter has finally ended, and a new one is starting. I spent a lot of time on my apartment balcony, watching the sun go down, guitar in hand, just letting my thoughts drift. And it's in those moments that I realize how far I've come. I'm not the same person I was when all this started. I've changed. I'm stronger now, more sure of myself. Mila's gone. Sandra's moved on. Even my dad is trying to figure out what's next. And here I am, on my own, and for the first time, I'm not scared of that. In fact, I kind of like it. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I take a deep breath and smile to myself. I've made it through the storm. I'm still standing. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm finally free. Maybe this was for the best. I say quietly, the words lingering in the air, as the last rays of sunlight fade away. And for the first time, I believe it.